My name is Darren Gerdes. I'm just a professor that tries to give you context in the war in Ukraine. I do deep dives on particular topics over the course of the week, and then on Saturday I'll do a live Q&A more often than not, and then on Sunday I will provide a comprehensive overview of weekly articles. So my list of articles, what I have read, I'll highlight the best articles and talk about those. Just to give you a recap, fill in the gaps of whatever you might have missed. Now we're going to look back as far as Sunday, July 16th. And the article that was first most prominent was Ukrainian drones intercepted over Crimea. And Russian media made a big deal about this. We knocked down these drones that were attacking things. Well, more was to come, and they didn't know that. General Silivierostov, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that, was fired. He was fired just a few days after General Popov was fired, and this is part of Putin's purge. And so this was a big deal that Putin has been purging, and more is to come, I'm sure. The U.S. OKs F-16 training in Europe, and that's a big deal as well. It's about to start in earnest, I believe, in Romania. Putin temporarily nationalized foreign companies. So companies that got out took a hit right away, and the companies that decided to stay because money was more important than people's lives in Ukraine, well, they're figuring out maybe this wasn't that good of an idea. I'm going to quote now. Russia has temporarily nationalized the assets of two major food and beer manufacturers. All foreign shares of Danone Russia, which is controlled by its French parent company, and Balita Breweries, controlled by the Danish Carlsberg Group. They've been nationalized. So, maybe it wasn't that good of an idea to stay. Russia hits Kharkiv for a third day, and now a third day. This goes back to NATO. So Putin throws a temper tantrum whenever Zelensky's at a meeting with, Ramstein or EU or NATO or G7 or whatever. It's more of that kind of thing. And so he'll indiscriminately bomb particular cities, and just as a way to show his displeasure. RT says that Putin says that the U.S. supply of cluster munitions is a crime. Of course, RT has been using, Russia has been using cluster munitions, but they didn't seem to think it was a problem until the U.S. was going to deliver it to Ukraine. Jake Sullivan dismissed the idea that the U.S. was debasing itself in providing cluster munitions. Nothing to see there. Kyiv says that Russia has prosecuted and convicted more than 50 Russian soldiers for war crimes. Not just being a soldier, but specific war crimes. Ukrainians are leaving tanks and now in the battlefield. I did a video last week about what it was really like with the counteroffensive, and I want you to go back to that. Counteroffensive, the whole truth, the truth about the counteroffensive is a fascinating look at this. So they have these lines of dragon teeth. And then they have landmines, and then they have a trench, and then they have this series of trenches where they can, coordinate fire, and then artillery, and then they can call down other artillery. It's like one thing after another. So these tanks are getting destroyed, and the Ukrainians are getting out on foot and attacking as small bands of infantry. It's really amazing what's going on there. It's been a very hard time for the Ukrainians, and I have to credit General Surovikin. When he pulled out of Kherson, we thought this was a big victory, but that was the right thing tactically for the Russians to do. Looked like a black eye, but pulling out and then creating these trench lines and these defensive works, he actually did a very good job from the Russian perspective. I hate that he did, but that's what's happened. Okay, Monday, 17 July. Russia pulls out of the grain deal. That was about to happen anyway. The Russians only extended it because Erdogan wanted to, because he was running for president, and it ended right in the middle of his run, and that helped him get over the edge. Russia pulls out of the grain deal, and then later on in the day, we find out the Kirch Bridge is attacked. The Kirch Bridge was attacked overnight, but the big news of the day was the Kirch Bridge attack, and this was really a big event. It crippled the transportation, but even more so, it was psychological. I grew up in the shadow of New York City, and when 9/11 hit, it really, if I was living 5 states away from where I grew up, and I still felt like punched in the gut just seeing the Twin Towers go down. And it's that kind of psychological thing for the Russians right now. Dmitry Medvedev, who was the former president of Russia, called for quite inhumane retaliation. That's a quote, quite inhumane. And then he said, one quote, this is another quote, one needs to blow up their own houses and the houses of their relatives. What? And find and eliminate their accomplices, abandoning the insipid idea of court trials against them. He's talking about whoever put this, hit the bridge, find them and find their relatives and kill them. Like, that's what he's saying. Yeah. And RT was, no, I did like 4 different videos on the Kirch Bridge. Like, here's what happened. Here's what the Russian media is saying. Here's an overview of everything. Another video was like, was it legitimate target or was it terror? RT was talking about how this is terrorism, this is terrorism, this is terrorism. And then Medvedev says that. Just unbelievable. Okay, Tuesday, 18 July, Moscow blames Ukraine for the Kerch attack. Ukraine was taking the credit, so what? Long-term effects of the Crimean Bridge are both logistical, creating traffic jams and headaches for Russia, and psychological. So Russia initially claimed that Ukrainian naval terror drone bases were destroyed, but what they were really hitting were grain silos because they were trying to keep them from coming back to the grain deal. Because they were trying to keep them from coming back to the grain deal. Okay, U.S. general says that Ukraine is making progress in a tough fight. Ukraine is seeking alternatives after the collapse of the grain deal because it's really so much more efficient to go by ship than to go by rail or to go by riverboat or by truck. Ben Wallace says that Ukraine has tragically become a battle lab, and that's exactly right. That is what has happened in Ukraine. General Miley says that the counteroffensive is far from a failure. It's going very slow, and I'll tell you just how slow in a moment. Are weapons from Ukraine going to Mexican drug cartels? This was a fascinating article that just because of the week's events, I just couldn't cover. But you periodically hear like, oh, these weapons that are going to Ukraine are falling into the wrong hands. You hear this from those that are pro-Russia. And this article was talking about how, look at these weapons, and they're in the hands of Mexican drug cartels. They weren't the same weapons that were in Ukraine. And there were experts that were talking about like, they don't go that way. They wouldn't make it to Mexico. They might make it to somewhere in Asia if they were falling into the wrong hands, but it's not what it appears to be. It was kind of it's a propaganda talking point. Okay, Wednesday, 19 July, Russia strikes at Ukraine after ending the grain deal. They're pulling out. The grain deal will reverberate. Tens of millions will be plunged into food insecurity. Putin doesn't care. I do believe that the grain deal will come back, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. The counteroffensive is going slowly, and that's kind of a problem, but this is what you can do given the circumstances. You don't have the air cover. And again, I would urge you to look at the counteroffensive, the whole truth video, because that's going to help you understand just what they're against. Prigozhin says that Wagner's quitting Ukraine. There's no surprise there. Okay, Thursday, 20 July, Russians continue to strike. 20 are injured in Mykolaiv and Odessa. So, yeah. Another article, women to boost morale will flash helicopters, the crew of helicopters as they go by. So that was just an interesting article. There's other ways to boost morale, but they're trying to support their soldiers. Kyiv has now has and is using cluster munitions as of Thursday, and are apparently using them to some good effect. MI6 chief says that China has been complicit in the invasion of Ukraine. There's not actively helping the Russians, but certainly morally, psychologically supporting, not condemning, siding with Russia in UN votes and things along those lines. Wagner reveals massive death toll. I did an entire video about this because it was so important. 78,000 Wagnerites. Only 1 in 5 actually survive unscathed. So you have 87. I was actually 79% casualty rates, either killed or wounded, if you're fighting with Wagner. That's remarkably bad. And Wagner, that's how they took Bakhmut, right? Through Wagner. So we don't know about the casualties on the other side, in the Ukrainian side, but it looks like a Pyrrhic victory as far as I can tell. Remaining Wagner fighters going to Belarus. There is about 16,000 left. About 10,000 went to Belarus. There's no way they could have had 25,000, or not 25,000 actually solid, ready to fight fighters when they did their march, Freedom March, or March for Justice, or Mutiny, depending on who you ask. So there's no way they could have done that. And this was only found out, the numbers, because some Ukraine, again, I did a video about this, about Wagner, so go look that up. Because some Russian Duma member in the Ministry of Defense said 33,000 of the Wagnerites have joined the Russian MOD. Well, there's only 16 of them, so what are you talking about 33? He made it up. He just admitted later on that he just made up those numbers. Okay, so yeah, that's something. U.S. says that it's laying the groundwork, that Russia is laying the groundwork to attack civilian ships in the Black Sea, and that sounds about right. We'll see what happens with that. The Odessa strike damaged the Chinese consulate, and that's also a bad look. A consulate is sovereign territory of the state from which the consulate comes, so they got to be careful with that. Zelensky fires the UK ambassador after the sarcasm comments. So what was that? Well, Ben Wallace said last week, I said to the Ukrainians last June, when I drove 11 hours to be given a list, I'm not Amazon. And then Zelensky qualified that and said, I just don't know what he means. How else should we thank him? Well, let him write me and tell me how we need to thank people so that we can be fully grateful. We can also wake up in the morning and thank the minister personally. And so Zelensky said that, and then he worked really hard to smooth things over. And the Ukrainian ambassador said that there was a little bit of sarcasm and said, I don't believe that this sarcasm's healthy. Don't say that. So your job as an ambassador is to represent your state. It's not to make your state look bad, right? And he's making himself look better at the expense of Zelensky and Ukraine, and that was not a good look. Now, was he fired because of that, or was he fired because he did this or that or the other thing, and then made the comments and then was fired? We just don't know. So, but it's always a bad idea to make the boss look bad. Okay, Putin claims that Poland is seeking to invade Belarus. I think that's deflection. There's nothing that I'm aware of that Poland is actually interested in invading Belarus. Lithuanians on the border feel unsafe and they fear a Russian attack. The Ukrainian prime minister says that we need to postpone all non-military expenses, and so the culture minister quit after a dispute about spending. If I was him, I get it. I would want to preserve the artifact and to preserve the building and rebuild something and whatever else. But you got to win the war so that you can continue to do that. So the culture minister quit over that. Taiwan is taking notes and watching what's going on with great interest, and they're building an army of drones because they've been inspired by the Ukrainians' success with drones. China is also paying attention, so the fastest path to peace in Taiwan is to win the war in Ukraine. But the big news today, well, I'm on Friday's news. The big news on Friday was the arrest of Igor Girkin. Igor Girkin was a mill blogger. He's a bad guy. I just shot a video that I'm going to release later today talking about Igor Girkin and what happened there. This is part of Putin's purge, and Girkin should have seen this coming. That's all I'm going to say about this. You can watch that video. Saturday, 22 July, the Kyiv Post says that every 100 meters costs 4 to 5 men. That's just mind-numbing to wrap your mind around. The counteroffensive is sobering. Ukraine attacks the Crimean ammo dump. And so that Crimean, this was just yesterday. And so the Crimean Bridge closed after the fuel depot was hit in the Krasnovardsky district. That's in the center of Crimea, which it's not near the bridge, which tells me that they're spooked that something else is about to happen. RT lists 7 conditions for the resumption of the grain deal, and if they're putting these conditions out, it's because they do want that deal. They just want to get some concessions to resume the deal, to look a little bit better or get some things that they haven't been able to get before. RT also says that Ukraine attacks Belgorod with cluster munitions. They're trying to make it look like, the Americans just delivered it. Now they're using these American weapons in Russia. Not necessarily. They had cluster munitions of their own. They had some from Turkey. And so, there's not much to see there. Now, this article was interesting. This was in GB News, which I've not seen before. If you're from Britain, if you can let me know if this is like a valid source, I'm going to follow up on it. But two more of Putin's allies mysteriously die in 48 hours. Anton Cherepniskov, he was a Russian spy. He had a heart attack at age 40. It sounds a little fishy. And a former government official, Igor Kudryakov, was found dead in his home on Thursday. And just because of the purge of these generals lately, this sounds a little fishy. It could be nothing, but it could be something to follow up on, and I'll be keeping an eye on that. All right, that's all that I have for you now. If you want to know anything about the Kirch Bridge, I did like 4 different videos about the Kerch. I also had this fascinating video about how lies spread, which tracks like, okay, so people say, I can't trust the mainstream media, and then they go to RT. Like, why? Look here, I show you how RT works, how it's funded, where, how the lies spread through the network, how it goes from bots to sophists, and it's a fascinating video. You need to follow up and watch that. And then you can watch about the counteroffensive as well. I show you one about like just how bad it is to get through the counteroffensive, and then a view from the Russian perspective of the counteroffensive. And after I showed that, this was the clips from RT where the journalist is like, we're right near the front, and like my viewers are pointing out like, nope, that's not near the front. See, those weapons don't even have any dirt on them, and this is like this, and that's like this, and good on you all for pointing those kind of things out. All right, that's it for the week. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine. I'll be back tomorrow, and I hope you will be too.